Okay, well, I'm going to say welcome to everybody, and we'll get going. We may well be joined by others as we go along. My name is Andrew Sims from the Rapid Transition Alliance, and welcome to our webinar about Too Hot for Sport, about sport and the climate emergency. I'm part of the Rapid Transition Alliance, which was set up a couple of years ago to gather evidence-based hope in a warming world. We are an international alliance of a wide range of groups, from small community-based groups up to kind of large international NGOs, gathering evidence about the possibility for change at the speed and scale that the climate science tells us is necessary. We've produced two reports on the theme of sport and the climate emergency. One, Playing for Time, looked at the wide range of impacts from the instability and extremes in the climate on sport. And the second one looked at how sport itself is implicated in the climate emergency in terms of it being a sort of almost a billboard for high carbon lifestyles and high carbon sponsors. Now, our membership includes a number of sports organizations, several of whom are with us today. And the great thing about sports people is that they're very active, they like getting things done. And it's almost as if at the moment, humanity needs a huge personal best if it's going to overcome the climate emergency and do what the science tells us is necessary. Even now, we're kind of hitting peak summer sport with the middle of the second week of the Olympics. And even just this week, some of the extremes in Japan have seen postponements and concerns about athletes' health, ranging from the sailing to the pole vault to the discus and even the swimming. I don't know if anybody saw the marathon swimming this morning, where the water was so warm that there were concerns for the health of the athletes. What we're going to be doing today is a very kind of quick pop round of short presentations from a range of organizations, all of whom in some way or other are tackling this issue. Short sort of 3-minute presentations, and then there will be plenty of time for questions and answers towards the end. However, in the meantime, as people are speaking, if you have questions, please use the Zoom Q&A function and put your question in there so that when people are not themselves speaking, they can answer your questions directly. And obviously, you can always use the chat function to raise any points that you would like to share with the panel as well. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Melissa Wilson, who is an elite rower, one of the founders of Champions4Earth, and more recently, OlyEarth, which she's going to tell you all about, which is a new initiative bringing Olympians together for climate action. So with that, I'm going to hand straight over to Melissa. Melissa.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so I'm part of Champions4Earth, which was founded by Etienne Stott, an Olympic champion canoeist, and next rower Dave Hampton in 2018. And my background, as Andrew says, is as an athlete. I was part of the GB rowing team for 7 years, and it was last March that I started getting involved with Champions4Earth. The group is all about getting athletes to be spokespeople and role models for sustainability and climate change. And we think that that's something that athletes are really well placed to do, partly because of the platform that athletes have. So 3.6 billion people watched the Rio Olympics in 2016, 3.5 billion people follow football, 2.5 billion people follow cricket, and then you've got basketball and tennis and rugby and all of the rest. Sorry about the alarm. But also because of the qualities that athletes have. So in some ways, athletes could use their platform to speak about anything, but the fact that in public perception, athletes are these people who pursue long-term huge challenges, like trying to get an Olympic gold medal, but do so each day with real urgency and do it collaboratively and with drive and resilience. Those are the sorts of qualities that we could so easily map onto how we need to be approaching climate change. And sport is also already an environment in which we talk all the time about legacy. And we saw that with London 2012, when the whole mantra was around inspiring a generation. One of the 3 pillars of the Tokyo Games is about leaving a legacy for future generations. And what we as Champions4Earth are saying is that only really makes sense if we also create an environmental legacy within which that sporting and athletic legacy can exist within. So with that in mind, last year in September, we published a letter to the government saying that we as athletes felt like in a sporting context, the UK is brilliant at looking to be world leading and also have this real focus on legacy, as we showed with London 2012. But when it comes to climate change, often, if we were to use sporting analogies, we felt like our leaders seemed to be happy being kind of middle of the pack, or sometimes even kind of tailing a bit. And when we put that in the context of the fact that COP26 is being hosted by the UK this November, and they also had the G7 presidency earlier this year, it seems like a really missed opportunity when actually we could be front and centre, really driving for the line and setting the pace for the global team as a whole. So we wrote that letter, and we had over 300 GB Olympians and Paralympians sign it, over 40 Olympic and Paralympic champions. And I'm aware of the time so quickly. What we've been doing since then is addressing the two challenges we see for athletes, which is firstly that they might feel like they don't know enough about all the complex issues surrounding climate change and all the science of it, so that in order for them to be credible spokespeople, we want to educate them and make them feel like they do understand that, so they can use their platform to share this information further. So we've created a 1-hour session for athletes that anybody can do, and we did it with some Tokyo Olympians just before the games. The other thing we've been doing is creating OlyEarth Plus, which is trying to address the fear athletes might have that they could be labelled hypocrites because of having to fly to competitions and not following plant-based diets and wearing unsustainable kit. So we've started supporting projects around peatland restoration and seagrass conservation and tree planting that athletes can get involved in a hands-on way. And that's part of what we've been building up over the summer, what we hope to continue. So you can get involved by visiting Champions4Earth website or OlyEarth's website, contacting me, Melissa, at champions4earth.com, and yeah, happy to hear from anybody. Thanks, Andrew.
That's fantastic, Melissa. And maybe post a couple of links to those key websites in the chat, then people can pick up on them really easily. So in a related and I think very complementary way, we're now going to go to Chris Broadbent from Planet Earth Games, who's got a range of ways in which people can get involved. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Chris Broadbent, the founder of Planet Earth Games, which is taking place at the moment across the whole of August. Our event, if you haven't heard of it, is something which is grounded in the idea that there's a symbiotic relationship between human health and environmental health. So we're very much about getting people physically active, but also educating them about sustainable behaviour as well. So making that connection with nature. We really believe that if people connect with nature, it's going to help their health and well-being as well. How do we work? We work by putting on a series of virtual events that are taking place right now. There's a challenge every day throughout August that educate, inspire and influence people towards active, sustainable lifestyles. Our approach is one very much of, climate change can be very overwhelming for many people, including me. There's a lot to get your head around. We work by simplifying it all to make it a much more accessible process for people who participate in the games. So it's about making small changes, be that around your diet, be that around your travel, considering active travel as opposed to using the car. It's about a whole host of things, about just making this small change in your life to make a bigger difference. And it's also about, we are the gamification of sustainability. We know there's a lot of information out there, there's general consensus around climate change, but if you gamify it, people just get a bit more bought into it, the whole process. It's one thing having the information, knowing about something, but actually people are more motivated by a game. It's a very effective process for getting people involved in sustainability. And also we work by just nudging people along. I wouldn't say we're an activist organization. There is a place for that, but Planet Earth Games works by just encouraging people to make small incremental changes in their lifestyles that makes it much more accessible for people. We are a virtual model at the moment. We're looking back to getting to an in-person event model in the future. What we found with our model is that we reach a really wide demographic of people. So I have a sports background, and I know it's very hard to get certain groups of people engaged in physical activity. So it's harder to get women engaged in physical activity than it is in men. It's harder to get people from a low-income background engaged in physical activity than it is those from a more affluent background. We've been very effective with our model of engaging more women than men, and we've also been equally successful engaging people with a low-income background to people from affluent backgrounds. So we've been successful in reaching that broad demographic. And the outcomes, there are outcomes to our event. The headline outcomes are that 64% of people are more active than they would normally be through Planet Earth Games, and 74% learn something new about sustainability. So it's about just nurturing that behaviour change in people. Obviously, we'd like to get, we're at very early days of running game for a year. We'd like to get more granular data and get a deeper understanding of what motivates our participants and how we can be more effective in changing human behaviour. So if there's any bright sparks out there who'd like to work with us and help us acquire some of this data, I'd love to hear from you. You can find out more on planetearthgames.org, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Chris Broadbent. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Chris. A whirlwind tour, and I've had a look at some of the things which are available, and I think you also get the award for word of the day with gamification. Do dive in. I really encourage people to have a go, because there's some fascinating and fun things to do there. Now, one of the biggest sports on the planet, of course, is football, and quite a few of our members are in some way or other involved in the game of football. And we've already seen how just in the last year, football has the potential as a platform to raise issues of social justice, to normalize issues which were once considered marginal, and to really kind of push for change. So next, we're going to be hearing from a few of our members who are in different ways involved in the game. In some way or other connected with Pledgeball. We're going to hear from Mark Doidge, and we're going to hear from Katie Cross, and we're going to hear from Jennifer Ammon. And I think we're going to start with Mark. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Just to build on what's already been said, I think what we can understand from sport is there's lots of different ways to engage people, because people participate. They could be elite athletes, they can be just having a kick around in the park, but equally there's lots of people who like just watching sport. And I come from a background, so I'm sitting here with 3 hats on really. One is as an academic, so I research political activism and football fans. And as just been said, football fans have engaged in a lot of different political mobilizations over the last 30 to 40 years, often in relation to things like hooliganism or challenging issues such as racism, which still exists, obviously. But what we are also seeing is that lots of fans are engaging in their communities and doing work. So what we're seeing is not just events and activities within football itself, but within their communities. So in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years has been engaged with food banks and working with their communities in that way. So from an academic perspective, I'm interested in how fans are going to mobilize around climate change, because whilst there is an issue with the impact of climate change on football, many fans aren't aware of it, and Jenny has done some great work already highlighting this, that many fans don't realise the impact that's going to happen. And David Goldblatt, who's done some work with Rapid Transition Alliance, has also highlighted the impact of climate change on football, things like flooding, adverse weather, etc. But equally, it's also about how we can mobilise those fans, because what we need is collective behaviour. We need not just individual changes, but collective action. And football fans represent probably one of the few aspects of collective action on a regular basis in the world. Every week they're going to a game, they're engaging in chants, in singing, in watching the same activity. So if they can change their behaviour as a collective, and with my second hat as a trustee with Pledgeball, Katie will talk a bit about how to engage fans in that particular way. And finally, with my third hat on, I also sit on the committee for an organisation called Football Supporters Europe, which is about advocating around football fans from a European perspective. And what we've done in the last 6 months is we started with one event, but because of other factors happening, like the Super League, we haven't been able to organise a second one. But it's about actually identifying fans who are active as fans, but also active as climate change activists, and to see if they can actually then intersect with their fandom and engage and mobilise them in a way that fans have been mobilised around, for example, governance in the sport or anti-racism. So I'll hand over to Katie and Jenny to sort of give a bit more of an insight into how they plan to engage fans.
Thanks, Mark. So hi, I'm Katie Cross. I'm the founder of Fudgeball. So very similarly to Chris's method, we aim at that large majority of the population who feel alienated by activists. And we try to address the cognitive dissonance and helplessness that people experience in the face of climate change. So we engage them and then support them on their journey to leading sustainable lifestyles and prioritising the planet. So the way in which we do this is we encourage football fans to make sustainable lifestyle choices in support of their teams. So each match day, fans can make one or a number of pledges. These range anywhere from using a reusable cup all up to installing solar panels, And the team of fans that pledges to save the most emissions wins that fixture, and the cumulative amount they pledge to save determines their place within the Pledgeable League. And besides the characteristics that Marcus talked about that make football ideal, obviously the sheer numbers make this ideal. So for example, if we look at the Sapporo Dome, one Sapporo Dome's worth of fans simply switching to buying secondhand clothes saves the same amount of emissions as taking over 3,000 cars off the road. So we work at, well, it's open to anybody. Any fan can get involved to support their team, but we also work with partners, and these support us with visibility, but they also provide structural support that helps fans to complete those pledges. Current partners include the likes of Bristol City, Huddersfield Town Supporters Association, and Birmingham County FA. Impact assessment is crucial to us. So at the moment, our public face does not reflect our work or its integrity, because we prioritise making sure that what we were doing actually worked. And this is where I was lucky enough to meet Jenny, because Jenny was interned to Mark, and she carried out her master's thesis on the impact of Pledgeable at our pilot club, Whitehawk. So I will hand over to Jenny to talk more about the research that she carried out.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So I'm Jenny, or Jennifer. I prefer Jenny, but well, we're in an official meeting here, so whatever. Now, I want to be brief. My study, or my master's thesis, had two main aims. Firstly, to find evidence for football fans being a promising yet not considered collective when it comes to mobilizing an existing group to take climate action. And secondly, to make sense of fans' experience with Pledgeball. And to do so, I connected research on mobilizing climate action and football fandom, and applied also an understanding of climate change being both an environmental and social issue, to then look at Pledgeball's collaboration with their pilot club, Whitehawk FC, which is based in Brighton and plays in the men's non-league. And as matches were cancelled due to the pandemic, a virtual lockdown league was created, consisting of 7 virtual fixtures, a social media campaign through which fans were asked to make pledges in support of the team, and a lockdown league table that also showed people how much CO2 emissions they pledged to save collectively. And I'll try to give you a brief overview about the key findings, which were the result of both surveys and in-depth interviews. Well, as Mark already said, while most fans are generally aware and also concerned about climate change, for example, 60 out of 65 fans stated that they would be willing to make changes to protect the environment, and 56 out of 65 stated that they would want their club to take more action. A connection between football and climate change was not really apparent. So if at all, people referred to professional football contributing to climate change, but no one really viewed football as something being negatively impacted by climate change. And regarding Pledgeball's impact, and also in line with findings from, among others, Karen O'Brien, who is a researcher who speaks of the need to address 3 different spheres of transformation to bring about sustainable outcomes, and also to treat people as subjects of change instead of objects that need changing, and thus also stressing people's agency. It was found that while both environmental, let's say, newcomers, but also already environmentally aware people perceived making pledges in support of their team as a new, motivating, and also a fun way to engage with the topic of climate change, but also with each other. And it also provided for some a good enough excuse in a way to start experimenting with some of the changes. Also being able to voluntarily choose from a list of behavior changes, which partly people already committed to anyway, but they didn't know about the impact, made it quite easy for people to get involved. And also the league table that I just referred to demonstrated to fans that other fans are concerned about the environment as well, and that they are also taking action, which was perceived as very encouraging, but it also showed fans and also the club that climate change is a topic that is okay to talk about also on the pitch. In addition, the league table made people also realize that their individual actions do make a difference, especially when scaled up to the group level. And what was even more interesting for me to see, though, was that through making these pledges, some interviewees became more conscious in their everyday life. The awareness about their embeddedness in a broader social context seemed to increase. And some started also to reevaluate their relationship with nature. and moreover, experimenting with these pro-environmental changes shifted people's perceptions of change in a more general way. So they realized, or they felt, that change does not necessarily have to be something difficult and unpleasant, which is often the case when we think about, we are not allowed to fly anymore, we have to give up on meat, all those kind of things. But here, on the contrary, people realize that it can be actually something enjoyable, leading to beneficial results for oneself, the broader football community, and also the environment. And to conclude, I just want to briefly add that regarding football fan community's potential for climate action, it is particularly fans' very high level of identification and emotional attachment with their team and also their fellow fans that represents a promising leverage point for environmental campaigns, like, for example, fudgeball. Yeah, thanks.
That's fantastic, Jenny and Katie and Mark. Thank you very much. And I can see that there's a kind of a question that perhaps all three of you can dip into in the Q&A box. So do please have a look at that. And developing and embellishing on this theme still further. Next, we're going to go to James Atkins from Planet Super League. So over to you, James.
Hi, I'm James from Planet Super League. And like Pledgeball and Planet Earth games, we're using football to help people to take action on climate change. At the moment, we've got 42 clubs involved, and that's some big clubs like Spurs and Liverpool, and also smaller clubs like Notts County or Northampton Town. And this is very interesting for us that the smaller clubs with richer local relationships with their communities are perhaps more active and more passionate about climate action. So what we do, we run seasons of about 6 to 7 weeks where families compete for their clubs by taking on green activities. We have two kinds of activities. Some are directly about reducing emissions, like switching your energy supplier, and some about getting children close to nature. Because as Chris mentioned, we also believe that it's a fact really, children spend time exposed to nature, they're more likely to be environmentally responsible as adults. We've got about 2,500 families involved at the moment. We'd obviously like that to be a lot more, as everybody would. One of the fun things, so we have these weekly fixtures. So, Northampton will be playing against Burton Albion, or Hibs will be playing against, we've got a Scottish team too, Hibs, be playing against Everton. And last week there was a massive fixture, Northampton against Arsenal, and the score was 421-430. So Arsenal just hipped Northampton. It was very exciting. And towards the end of the week, you get families, and this is proving out the theory that we share with Katie, that people will do things that they wouldn't normally have done because of their love for football, which is so close to their identity. And so on Saturday, loads of Arsenal fans say, "Oh, I need to do a plant-based meal. I need to go for a 2-kilometer run and stuff," and it works. Whether it has a lasting effect, it's all early days for all of us. You have to work out how you transform one-off activities into lasting habit change. We've got to learn that. We focus mainly on families at the moment, and there's very nice interactions between, tend to be traditional families, so mums and dads and children bring information back from school. Parents don't really know about climate change so much. The mums are the ones making lots of decisions about what to eat, where to shop, how to travel and stuff, so they play into it. Dads don't really know what to do with the kids at the weekend. And so these are the dynamics that we try to play on. Eventually, we hope to become better established and then even try in other sports. We've had some discussions with some other sports where there's similar competitive structures. I don't think it'd work for tennis because you don't really have tennis teams in the same. It might work for basketball. And we think it can work in other countries. obviously diets are different in other countries and eating practices and stuff, but the principles. So that's Planet Super League. We'd love to talk to anyone who's interested in helping us out, getting involved. Yeah, thank you very much.
Fantastic, James. And I'm going to ask you to pop any links you've got to your work addressed to all panelists and attendees in the chat so that people can kind of find the link. And really interesting listening to you talk about the benefits of contact with nature as well. I'm involved in my local community athletics clubs called Herne Hill Harriers, and they've got a campaign going on at the moment to get their track resurfaced so that it can be fit for competition. And we were having an event recently, and speaking about the community value of that. One of the great things about sport, and especially in the way that it gives people a connection to what the issue of climate change is all about, is that especially obviously with all the sports that take place outside, if you're cycling or running, it reconnects you with nature. And we know that when you get involved in sport in this way, the so-called 5 ways to well-being, all those 5 boxes are ticked. You get involved in some way of giving back into the community, of taking notice, of connecting, of being active and learning. So there are these huge co-benefits of engagement with sport, which spill through into the potential for climate action. And now, having sort of dwelt for a little bit on the team sports and on football, we're going to hear from Claire Poole, who's the driving force of the Sports Positive Summit and has been something of a bridge between the range of sporting activities you've been hearing about and some of the big official procedures relating to the United Nations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Claire. Claire.
Thanks, Andrew. Lovely to hear what everyone's up to, even though we catch up all the time. It's lovely to refresh on everything as well, and lovely to see everyone here. A lot of familiar faces and names, so lovely to have you all, and hopefully we'll hear from you as well about the projects that you're working on. So yeah, I'm sure maybe a lot of you know about Sport Positive Summit and our work with UN Sports for Climate Action framework, but just so you're aware, we host an annual event which brings the sports and sustainability community together. We work with all of the global alliances on that. I saw Russell is here from BASIS. We work with Green Sports Alliance, Sport Environment Alliance in Australia, folks in Japan, Sheila down under for Sports Environment Alliance, and BASIS, GSA, all of these good people to bring the community together and drive forward 2 main streams. So the operational side of how we can support sports operationally in reducing their impact on the environment, and then once they have their own house in order, how we can use the power of sport to engage fans and consumers around these really important issues in a fun way, where the passion and their love of their game and their sport can be used as a lever towards positive action. So we do loads and loads of work across the year and kind of spend a lot of time making connections and helping people collaborate and drive forward new partnerships as well. A couple of elements I just want to touch on really briefly in terms of time, just the Sport Positive Leagues, which we have done to a degree, and to the question in the chat box which just popped up, Nikki's question about the rating teams and clubs for their attitude to climate change and carbon footprint. There is, it's not, the work that's happening isn't a perfect science, including our sustainability leagues, where we basically started working on the Premier League, Bundesliga. We're working on Ligue 1, La Liga, Serie A, and the football side around environmental sustainability metrics, and working with the clubs collaboratively to understand what they're doing, and then providing kind of a ranking for that, which is not to pit clubs against each other, but more just to show which clubs are sort of doing quite a lot holistically and others that maybe are a little bit further behind right now. It isn't a perfect science. It isn't a carbon footprint. It isn't a defined metric. It's incredibly difficult for us to get to that, especially if all of you have dealt with the fun times of scope 1, 2, and 3, and how most of sports footprint comes from that scope 3 with fan travel, etc., to games, broadcast, and other sides of that. So it's really difficult, Nikki, to kind of have an exact carbon footprint and a ranking in one sport, let alone across multiple sports. I know there's organisations trying to do that, and I think there's a long way to go on that. So while we do a little bit of work in this area, really just to help drive action forward, we're more about supporting organisations to benchmark their own performance internally and improve on that. So that's a little bit on the leagues, and happy to chat about that further as well. And then the other side I just want to flag, because I know a couple of people introduced themselves as grads, and hopefully we can help on that side as well. Just to mention that this year we're launching our Sport Positive Next Gen Summit, which is free to attend for 250 people aged 18 to 30. So if you're a student athlete, you know, entry-level worker, intern, volunteer, currently looking for work, and you're passionate in this area, we invite you to register for that. At the minute, we've got loads and loads of registrants from Europe and North America, but it's a global event. And in terms of inclusion and the fact it's free to attend, we're reserving tickets for people in Central and South America, Asia, Asia Pac, Africa, etc., and driving momentum around that. But for those of you who are interested, do join us with that, because it's a forum to hear from leaders. Jenny is going to be speaking at that event, and we've got loads of brilliant speakers on that, where we've got leadership from the younger age group who perhaps aren't at the decision-making level inside sports organisations, but are working really hard in this area and are driving so much change and so much innovation through their work, even studying and beyond. That it's the next generation of leaders that are going to be coming at this from a much more holistic sustainability approach, which is exactly what we want. So join us at that and give us a shout if there's anything we can help with. We've had a lot of conversations around dissertations in the past few months, and we're really happy to help. And if we can, just let us know on that. But otherwise, yeah, lovely to be here and happy to take any questions after everyone's spoken.
That's fantastic, Claire. And as with the others, I'm going to invite you to pop maybe a couple of links to the things that you've mentioned in the chat to all panelists and attendees. And the event you described sounds absolutely amazing. And I've got a feeling that I'm going to fail on every single criteria to qualify for a free place for that, but good nevertheless. And I was also really interested in what you said about the way in which those so-called scope 3 emissions, like the fan travel to major events, are one of the hardest things to deal with. And it's interesting that at the moment we're watching an Olympics that everybody feared might be sort of fatally undermined by the lack of fan attendance. But actually, watching it, it doesn't seem to have lacked for human drama, nor indeed incredible world record breaking performances. So I wonder if we are seeing a moment in which new possibilities are emerging, in which we're having to adapt how we engage with especially the big global elite level sporting events. But that's something that maybe we can discuss more as we go. So with that, and speaking about events which attract possibly the biggest global audiences of all, we're now going to hear a little bit from Richard Hamilton from the Spirit of Football. And the Spirit of Football is an amazing thing that happens whenever the World Cup happens. And I find it particularly interesting because it charts a journey from the location of the first modern rules game in Battersea Park in London to wherever the World Cup is happening. But Richard also, sort of bridging to some of the things that Claire is talking about, has designs on doing things around the next big climate conference in Glasgow as well. So we'll hear a little bit from Richard now. Over to you, Richard.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. Nice to see you all. So my name's Richard Hamilton. I'm one of the directors of the Spirit of Football. Spirit of Football is 3 Spirit of Footballs, UK, Germany and Brazil. And it's a kind of a grassroots NGO that works very much on environmental, well, very much on educational work. And more recently, we've been trying to give a focus to the environmental cause. Now, what we tend to do is over the course of the last 20 years is delivering this fair play program, which is an education program, and it has an arm of it called the Spirit of Humanity that works in refugee camps, etc. And more recently, we've incorporated a sustainability development program inside that. Now, our flagship program, which is the bit which kind of gives us a big tap into all the people on the panel here, and we've learned a lot from over the last year or so, is we have this project called the Ball. And the Ball travels every 4 years to the World Cup, overland, and on its route it profiles particular causes. So first one back in 2002, and we've done 5 journeys so far. They normally take about 6 months to complete. And our biggest focus has been on refugees, host communities, and displacement, as well as with people with special needs. Now, more recently, where this has got really exciting for us and the Sports for Climate Action, is we've recognised that the Ball is a fantastic tool to use to profile the climate situation. Now, for us, we've completely recognised we're not the experts on this at all. So we've been, over the course of the last 6 months, a year, has been tapping into many of you to understand more about the sports for climate action component and design the Balls project for the next World Cup to take on a particular angle on the emergency. Now, I've just got my little boy knocking on the door there. So this next World Cup in 2002, 2003, is that we will go back to Qatar, and then we will continue to the Women's World Cup down in Australia, New Zealand. So that's 23,000 miles, and we're going to do it as climate neutral as possible. So we recognise it's going to be very, very difficult to do it in certain countries and locations, but we want to show what is possible right now and what isn't possible right now. And part of the tools we're going to be using, we're going to use advocacy components. So we've got Katie and Pledgeball to help a kind of particular pledging components of this. Then we'll also want to gather signatures on the ball, which we've done for all the journeys previously, as well as have a virtual ball that we present to FIFA of our findings en route. Now, as we say, as we're not the experts, we're not taking a message with us to give to people en route. We're going to gather those messages, and we have a dedicated TV film production company and a digital storytelling organisation who will help us compile all of those stories around the impact of climate change on football and the impact of football on climate change, and be able to use that to get a collective voice to be able to present to FIFA at the end of the tournament itself. Now, what we also recognise is most of the people that we've been speaking to around the panel right now, as well as kind of globally, is that it lacks that voice. It's always come from a place of privilege. So we're very, very keen to tap into the local communities that we meet on our journeys in very obscure locations, and be able to lift that voice out of there and to help to listen and to be able to bring that to the table as the discussions go on. Just one kind of final point, which I'll put out in the link, where how the ball journey is going to be taking place and how that goes. But actually, there's two particular points. One is that I can absolutely guarantee in the year that we've been looking into this, is that we've seen a significant increase in the amount of people who are getting involved in sports for climate action. So there's a very positive drive going on at the moment. And we're seeing it again and again in different places that we're talking to around the world. For example, right now I'm in India, speaking with the Indian Super League, with Real Kashmir, the local club down in Chennai, the street football leagues here. There's a lot of energy going on in a lot of countries that we all tap into. With regards to what was saying about a big event at the COP26, and Simon, thanks for the introduction to that, is what we're hoping on the 7th of November is to host a tournament called the World COP, and to bring anyone and everyone together who might be around that particular time. That's the day off on the Sunday of the COP26. So we know that there's a lot of people going to be around. And in the course of the next few weeks, we'll, with a little working group with the Rapid Transition Alliance and the Cool Down Network, we'll put together kind of a proper invite about how that's going to happen and how we can get all these collective voices together. But as I say, for us, is the event at COP26 is a big hit for us, the World COP, and then the Balls journey will start on the 10th of July next year, and it will take a year to get to Australia and New Zealand for that. And we'll bring you all up to date on how that's going to take place and all the fun and the fair that will come with it, and all the messaging we would like to be part of and with you guys in collaboration. So thank you.
Richard, thank you so much. And I'm hugely looking forward to Glasgow. It may be the first game of football I'll have played for about 30 years. So I'm getting in training now. And I can also let people know, as a little incentive, for if anybody is going to be in Glasgow, there will be a trophy for the World COP, which is going to be made by a leading British artist, to be revealed nearer the time. So do keep an eye on the Rapid Transition website. We'll have details of the events as they are organised going up on there. And the day before the thing that Richard was talking about on the Saturday, there will be a number of other events that you can come along and join in with, and there will be a social in the evening as well. So do keep a lookout on the Rapid Transition website for those things. Now, next we're going to hear from Barney Weston. Barney Weston is representing Football for Future, which is another quite fresh, new and exciting initiative, which is spreading the message within the game, but again takes a slightly different approach. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Barney. Barney.
That's right. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Andrew, for such a kind introduction. And what a pleasure as well to be here with everyone else. We're all working in this sector. We're all doing our bits and pieces, and everyone's doing such great work. And I'm so pleased to have been last and to have heard about it all before. So wonderful. Thank you very much. But yeah, as Andrew said, my name's Barney. I'm working with Football for Future. But perhaps more importantly than that, I'm a fan of St Albans City FC. Love the badge. I'm a fan of football, but I'm also slightly concerned about the environment and climate change and what's going on in all this. So in August last year, a group of fans, we came together and we thought, right, we want to try and build a more environmentally sustainable culture in English football. We want clubs saying stuff about this. We want players saying stuff about this. And over the course of the year, it has been happening. Players coming out and making stands politically on other subjects and on climate change. Gary Lineker tweeting quite a lot recently, even today, about climate change and how it's something that we really need to do about it. But unlike Gary, perhaps in a slightly alarmist way, it's a bit kind of like, oh my God, the world's on fire. The way that we want to approach it is by getting all football fans involved in a positive way that can change football culture. And we found that generally, there's so much appetite to make this happen. I mean, we've got 10 panelists here today who want to talk about this and make this happen. It's the same at clubs. It's the same at players. There's so much appetite and we just want to harness it. So how do we do this? How do we want to build this more environmentally sustainable culture in English football? Well, one, it's about raising awareness. It's going on calls like this. It's talking to fans. It's spreading the good word. But we also do educational workshops on this subject. We go into schools and we tell them about the relationship between football and climate change. If you're interested in learning more about, there's a lot out there. I personally really like the Playing Against the Clock report. Shout out to the Rapid Transition Alliance and David Goldblatt, who's also the chair of our board of trustees who wrote that. It's an excellent place to learn about the issue. And so we have these educational workshops, and we also work with players to help them become ambassadors for this subject so they can feel confident to go out there and talk about this. The other way that we work to build a more environmentally sustainable culture in English football is we go and work with the clubs themselves. Clubs are huge community hubs. They reach loads of people, just like players. And by working with them and getting them to become more environmentally sustainable, we're reaching their fans and showing them that environmental sustainability is common sense. So we're currently working with a Premier League club where we're publishing their carbon footprint. It's just scope 1 and 2 for those that know what that is. I didn't 6 months ago. And we're signing them up to, we're also delivering for them a skeleton sustainability strategy with loads of different bits and pieces that they can commit to, and making changes that way and getting their carbon footprints down, then showing to their fans that, hey, this is something that you can do as well. So that's kind of us, really. If you're interested, if you want to get involved, we're working right now on that educational workshop project with a couple of Premier League club foundations. We're working on this project with this Premier League club, getting their carbon footprint out there and getting it down as well. If you want to do it, I'll drop my email in the chat. Get in touch. And we'd love to help. We're all volunteers. All but one of us are under 30. We all love football. And come get involved. So thanks very much.
That's brilliant, Barney. And I can't quite remember what being under 30 is like, but I'll take your word for it. It sounds like a good place. Sounds like a place with lots of energy. Now we've had several questions which have come up, and I know one or two people have been answering directly, but they are quite sort of big and common theme questions. It'll be interesting to hear a little bit more from our panelists on them. The three big things which have come up so far at the moment is if you are a fan of a local club, how do you make the first steps to engaging your club in this kind of conversation? We had another question about how to reach out to schools. Obviously, for many people, school might be the only time in your life when you spend a considerable amount of time engaged in sport, and partly because you might not have any choice in it. But are there options being missed there in terms of how we work with schools? And then we've had a question from Tom about how, especially at the more elite level within the game of football, and referring back to Claire's point about scope 3 emissions and fan travel and all the rest of it, the way in which some of the really big clubs are carrying sponsorship and advertising for either, within the game of football, and obviously we have the problem with the UEFA being sponsored by Gazprom, but sponsors who represent a kind of high carbon lifestyle. It's cars, it's flights, it's planes, it's aviation. What can we do about that? How can we start the conversation there? And I'm going to make this a kind of a popcorn type reply here. So if any of my panelists want to jump in, please do. And I'm sure we're still few enough to be able to not speak over each other. But if you feel moved to pick up on any of those points, please just kind of like jump in.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in if no one else is. I just sent a message to Tom there. I think this is the biggest problem, and we've got to recognise the potential hypocrisy involved. You know, we have football players who are often seen as high consumers, but we also then see football players who are being socially responsible. Marcus Rashford being an excellent example, but also other players talking about racism. We see fans. I used an example in the reply that I just made to Tom about Newcastle United, who a lot of fans hate their current owner. And when the Saudi royal family was interested in taking them over, they were like, "Oh, this is great." And the human rights, the fact that journalists had literally been killed by one of them was ignored, because competing and winning is for a lot of fans what they're interested in. But we should also recognise lots of fans aren't, they're interested, but it's not the only thing, because if they did, or they were only concerned about winning, they wouldn't be supporting, with all due respect, Barney, St Albans or Southampton or whoever, because they are actually interested in the community of going along, the collective actions, being with friends and families, and being part of a community, both a football community, but also being part of their local community. And it's with those people that we try and engage. And I think then it's about creating this positive, to a certain extent, we can sort of see the history of anti-racism in football is about changing those behaviours. It does take some time, but then what we now see with anti-racism in football is that the front pages are criticising players for taking a knee, but the back pages are criticising the fans for booing them. And we want to be in that sort of situation with climate change, where there might be front pages of newspapers sort of questioning whether we should be doing something about climate change. But actually, we also then have a group of people who are going, no, this is actually going to affect our clubs, it's going to affect our communities, and they become sort of vocal agents of change. And I think that's sort of, it's potentially a slow process, but it's something that I think we have to try and work through. But I think the key thing is fans aren't homogenous. There's a lot of different types of fans. Some of them are violent, and some of them are, engaging with food banks and being, lovely in their community. So we've just got to try and recognise that diversity and try and work with the ones who potentially want to do something, and then hopefully that can snowball.
Mark, thank you. That's a wonderfully nuanced take on the subject, and possibly the first time in a webinar that being a fan of St Albans FC has been held up as evidence of the best of human nature. So there is definitely hope for us all. And I can actually second what you've said about involvement at the community level. Where I live in South London, literally every day since the start of lockdown, the community-owned football club in Wimbledon has been gathering and collecting for food banks outside the big supermarkets and food shops in about 3 different locations in London, and they're out there in all weathers. It's remarkable and wonderful. And also the point that you make reminds me of how when a single global sort of football superstar moves a bottle of Coke off a press release table, you can shift billions of pounds off a large corporation's spreadsheet. So fascinating stuff. And I think James might be going to add something. Were you going to add something, James?
I think Katie wanted to say something. No, she raised her hand. I also wanted.
Let's go to Katie and then come back to you, James. Katie.
That's very kind. Thanks, James. I mean, just to answer Tom's question as well about the balancing that you're using the clubs who, again, are open to hypocrisy. I think it's about changing the narrative around climate change, because none of us are perfect. It's incredibly difficult for any of us to get anywhere near where we need to be. It takes a lot of effort, but that's a narrative that we can all jump on board with, the clubs, the individuals, the athletes. And that's obviously where Melissa, particularly with her work at Champions4Earth and OlyEarth, comes into play, because it's about educating people and encouraging people to take on this narrative that none of us are perfect, but we're all on this journey together. So clubs, for example, I think there was a sustainability ranking of sports organisations produced recently that I saw, and actually FIFA ranks third out of a number of organisations. And obviously there's a huge amount you can criticise them about, but equally I think everybody has to say, well, this is what I'm doing, and these are the things that I can currently do right now and am doing, and these are the things that are very that are out of reach currently, but I am working towards. And I think if everybody takes on that narrative and we encourage that narrative, it brings whole swathes, organisations and individuals along with it.
That's great, Katie. Let's go to James and then we'll hear from Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that the world is a dirty and messy place. And if you only dealt with purest of the pure, you'd have these small attendance. And so, you know, virtually all the clubs are either owned by betting either sponsored or owned by organisations and people who we probably wouldn't have dinner with. But they're also hundreds of thousands and millions of ordinary folk passionate about them, and they're the people we're serving. We're not serving the oil barons or the people that own airlines, we're serving the people who are out there going to the games.
That's a really good point, James. Thank you. And whoever these purest of the pure are, I don't know. I've never met them anyway. Melissa.
Yeah, I think following on from what Katie was saying in particular about the scope we have to make change and not getting too hung up on the things that we can't do, I think there's the kind of two approaches to the polluting sponsors piece. There's the fact that Rapid Transition Alliance was part of that report earlier this year, Sweat Not Oil, which is about pushing clubs to drop high carbon polluting sponsors. But I think there's also recognising the scope that athletes and sports clubs have to promote the organisations and corporations that are actually would allow us to live more sustainable lives. And I think, especially from Champions4Earth's point of view, if we can get athletes promoting low carbon energy providers or plant-based diets there are so many initiatives now that do allow us to make these gains and live more sustainable lifestyles. And I think if we can keep focused on that as much as on how do we influence clubs to drop their sponsors, then actually we get to take control of that. And I think in some ways it's adopting the athlete mindset of, this is my goal right down here, this is the gold medal that I want to achieve. And sometimes people, I think, in this sports sustainability space start to talk about marginal gains, because that's an often used phrase in sport. And I think the challenge with that is that the gains that we need to make here aren't really marginal. And if we talk about that, that's athletes use that approach when they've done all the big stuff, they've pursued excellence with huge ambition over years, and they're kind of scraping the barrel for the last few things they can do. But actually, we're in a situation where almost every single aspect of our lives we can make change in, and it could feel overwhelming or it could feel like a huge opportunity. And I think if each of us as individuals, it can feel too big to be sitting watching your club's football match and seeing an oil or high polluting sponsor on every billboard, but actually what are the things that you can be doing to make influence just in your circle? And there's that amazing fact about if each person shared a piece of information with 3 new people, we'd get that message out to every person on the planet in 8 weeks. So there's the kind of like, how can we have that activist piece of the puzzle to make sure that we do start shifting away from high polluting sponsors, but what are the opportunities that we are rife with in our lives to share messages and share organisations that are doing good work in this space and promote them as well.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Those are all really, really good points. And it's an interesting kind of reflection about how when you're in the middle of trying to achieve change, it can seem incredibly difficult. But even where sport's concerned, if we think back to when I used to go and watch cricket at my home in Essex, it was a sponsorship there was a competition that was sponsored by a cigarette brand. Cigarette sponsorship and tobacco sponsorship was incredibly high profile. It was all across sport. Now it's history, and we would be amazed to see it back. So I think, first of all, changes are possible. And when we talk about marginal gains, and there is this tension about saying that the little things are no longer enough when we need the big stuff, but marginal gains cumulatively can create the conditions in which big leaps and big shifts can happen. So I think obviously we keep eyes on the long horizon of the big changes, and as you say, do what we can in the meantime. Now, would any other of our panelists like to jump in on that? And indeed, would any of them like to ask each other questions from the things that you've heard so far? I see Claire.
I'll just jump in really quickly, Andrew. Yeah, I think on the fossil sponsor side, just really briefly, it is a massive challenge for sport, but also I think we've touched on a little bit, but not really underlined, is how we can actually use sports position and the name of those brands in terms of sponsorship to get some of these high polluting companies to move to more positive behaviors. I think, as has been underlined here, you know, there is a lot of dirty organizations out there, and fossil fuel or airlines or car manufacturers, etc. But part of it, I think, is around the ambition of what they want to do, rather than like, well, this is what we do and this is how it stands. If the power of sport can be used within those collaborations to drive the corporates to make changes, that's where we want to be, because from a fan level, it's incredible. And we saw from the European Super League what fans can achieve when they come together and say, we're not having this. Unfortunately, I think we're a long way from fans taking that kind of action to say, we demand, you know, changes on climate change, unfortunately. And actually, we know that horrifying statistic of like 10 global corporations are responsible for like 70% of emissions or whatever. So actually, in terms of the power of sport, to try and work with those organizations and use their influence towards divesting or, you know, changing the way they're working is also really powerful. And then just another point on that there is a lot of nuance around that. Again, sort of Mark touched on it there before. We don't want sport just pulling out of, well, we do want sport to pull out of fossil fuels, but not to then replace those sponsorships with bet gaming or other sponsors that are going to cause wider social issues that we need to be combating. We need to be working with them towards positive sponsors and positive collaborators. So it's there's no easy answers to any of it, but I just think those couple of points I just wanted to throw in on that.
Those are really good points, Claire, and maybe I could just kind of ask you that with you're having conversations, you know, most days of the week with people who are in this space. Are you feeling a sense of movement? Do you think things are sort of ramping up at all? And I wonder if the increasing number of ways in which people are seeing visible impacts from extreme weather events on sport, do you feel that things are shifting?
Yeah, 100%. I think in the past, like I would say 2.5 years, I think there's been a shift to, we're doing bits and bobs on this, to it's actually becoming an imperative now. There's still a huge way to go, and all sports and all different parts of the world are obviously approaching things very differently. And I think that's fascinating as well. In Europe, I think there's still a very large focus on the environmental side, but we're seeing now in North America that the diversity, the inclusion side is really pushing forward at a much more dramatic rate, and environment is sort of slipping in behind that or becoming part of that. So geographically, a lot of sport are at different stages with that. But I think now the coverage on mainstream media, how often we're seeing it spoken about in sport, again, it's not where we want it to be, but if you think of, you know, the BBC's coverage on Sport 2050, Sky and their climate show, you know, a lot of articles and pieces on broadcast now about it shows a barometer of what people care about and how important this is to talk about. So I think it is becoming more of an imperative, but I still feel like we're at this, even though there's so much progress, there's still so far to go. So we can't let up on it for a second.
Thank you. That's great. I'm going to bring Chris in and Mark in. And while Chris and Mark are speaking, I'm going to put a question to all our panelists, so they've got a couple of minutes to think about it. And then what we'll probably do is kind of wrap up with a once round with your reflections on this. Now, all of you have different levels of kind of knowledge and expertise in different sporting areas. And I want to put to you the question of, what does sport look like if it's on a pathway to being compatible with staying within climate targets? At the moment, there's a lot of sort of, you know, structural pollution locked into a lot of the big global sports. And I wonder if we can begin thinking about what the shape of global sports and global sports competitions look like if they're going to be climate friendly. What are some of the changes that we might see? So I'm going to want to leave that thought with you, and I'm going to come back for a thought from each of you on that. But just before that, I'm going to go first to Chris and then to Mark. Chris.
No, it's just an additional thought to what was being discussed there about. I think there's what's happened in recent years with social media as well, that the athletes themselves, the sports people themselves, have started to become aware of their own influence and their own power to influence behaviour as well. So a really good example of that was at the Euros. Really simple act, but Cristiano Ronaldo moving the bottle of Coke out of his way in the press conference, and I think people are. There's a real is oxymoron the word? I don't know if it's the right word or not, but there's a real juxtaposition, let's put it that way, between sport being sponsored by junk food, and I think we're waiting for that moment to happen in terms of fossil fuel companies as well. But I think I do think it's in the post, because I think athletes are getting a grip of what their real power is in terms of influence. I think we are going to see those moments coming in the near future. I don't think they're very far away either.
Ooh, it's in the post. I quite like that. I'm waiting for the postman to knock. Let's go to Mark.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add to something that Claire said about people being aware of climate change affecting sport. I was reading an article about actually floods in New England, and actually we're almost like the frogs in, there's the analogy of the frogs being heated up. And if you put a frog into boiling water, it jumps out. But if you heat up the water while it's in it, it sort of just slowly boils. And we potentially those frogs slowly boiling under climate change, because we just we're actually, as you said, Andrew, we're right in the middle of it, and we don't necessarily see the bigger picture. And that's what's becoming problematic and difficult about changing people's behaviours. But sport is something that we could use as a way of engaging people, because it is a regular activity. So we can compare and contrast, for example, the Tokyo Olympics in 2021 to, what was it, 1974? I'm struggling to remember when the Tokyo Olympics was. Or we could contrast 1948 London Olympics in 2012 and just see what the weather was like, because it's happening at the same time. And we can do the same thing with football. If there's more matches being called off because of bad climate, or for particularly rain on waterlogged pitches, etc., there's that regularity that gives us something to refer back to. Otherwise, what tends to happen is, well, people aren't seeing the changes. They're going, oh, it's always been raining, hasn't it? It's just typical. It's a typical British wet summer, as opposed to, well, actually, let's look at that pattern, and using people's love of sport to go, well, actually, this wasn't like this 10 years ago, 30 years ago, etc.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. And I'm now going to be your human fact check. The last Tokyo Games was 64. And I'm also going to be really, really cruel on your frog analogy, because bizarrely, several years ago, in an idle moment, I got very interested in that analogy, and I looked it up, and I looked up some zoologist research. And it turns out actually that frogs don't hang around in slowly warming water. They're really clever. They get out. So you could actually argue that in our current condition, humans are more stupid than frogs, in that we're allowing these things to go on. But sorry, but it's oft repeated in management circles, but yes, it's quite fun when you dig down and find out. Just while we now go back to the panelists, if anybody else who's tuned in has got any additional questions they want to get in the last few minutes, please put them in the Q&A now, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on them. We have been recording this, and we will try to make it available when I work out how to do it on the Rapid Transition Alliance website. But now we can do it either in popcorn, or maybe we could do it in kind of reverse order of how people spoke so far. Yes, let's do that. That'll be fun. Let's go for your last thoughts on visions for the games that you are most interested in and engaged with, and what they might look like when they become climate friendly and compatible with our pathway to staying within climate targets. Let's start with Barney. Barney.
That's a quick switcheroo there to caught me off guard. No, but well, look, I mean, obviously I'm a big football fan. I think that the game could there's changes that could be made like immediately. Just the club changing their energy supply with a Premier League club that's like 5 figures, I don't see that as a huge amount of money for a Premier League club. So that is a way of getting your carbon footprint like straight down. But I mean, if we want to go, pie in the sky, how many years time? 20? We don't know. I think at Football for the Future, we're just focused on getting these wins now. But there are questions about fan travel. It accounts for 70% of football's carbon emissions. I don't think anyone wants to see empty stands. We all know what that looks like. And probably there needs to be some kind of innovative solution surrounding that. But I'm not here to talk about that yet.
Thanks, Barney. That's great. Richard.
Hey, folks. So I think from our side, and I think what we want to ground, or at least from Spirit of Football we want to ground, is a lot of the conversation we hear about sports for climate action is very much from a place of privilege. And we forget that also most of the fans on the planet come from a place where it's the hardest hit locations by the climate emergency, and the people who have the least influence or voice in the whole process. So from our side, we're very, very keen to promote increased support to low carbon, local grassroots football or sports initiatives in places where they're not going to have access to that kind of support, and to make sure that when we talk about all this, the collective voice of sport and the impact it can have, that we try to bring in as much of the voice that are from the places where they're most affected and where the most supporters really are. I mean, where I am in India, you know, put the cricket lot and the football lot together, that triples Europe straight away. You know, put that big voice out there. Thank you.
Brilliant, Richard. Thank you so much. Over to Claire.
Hello. So in terms of, we obviously work predominantly with professional sport, slightly different to what Richard was talking about there from the grassroots side. But basically, I think the future of sport more generally in terms of being compatible means, for me, the biggest change that needs to be made is that all decisions need to be made through an environmental sustainability lens. So when scheduling takes place, how competitions are growing, how many, sort of events have to take place in an Olympic cycle, how many national events need to take place, when they take place, how far people are traveling from, where they're coming from. I think the systemic approach to, I don't think, none of us want to see sport going away. We don't want to see empty stadiums, etc. As Barney's mentioned, there's so many things that can be changed in the foreseeable future to reduce our impact. But in terms of the longer term and being compatible, we can't keep seeing growth. So sports as a business is going to have to be more savvy about, if it wants to maintain the money that it's bringing in, it's not through growth, it's through changing offerings. And I think the federations and governing bodies need to look really closely at scheduling, competition times, and where people are coming from.
So would it be fair to say, Claire, that we, in that world, we would not be seeing another Euros spread across 11 countries simultaneously? I
think so. And I think that was obviously a decision made, 8 years ago for the 60th anniversary. And I think hopefully UEFA have learned their lesson through that. I think that's the other problem with mega events. They're planned so far in advance and the zeitgeist has changed dramatically, but they're left with those decisions and the sort of kickback from them.
Fantastic. James, over to you, James.
So I think in a climate emergency, no business can assume it's got a license to operate. So we've removed the license to operate from fossil fuel companies. We'll remove it from synthetic fertilizer companies very shortly. And there's a whole host of other businesses which are going to go. So I don't think sport as a business necessarily has to exist in the way it exists. So, I mean, probably international sport, we could do without international sport. We enjoy watching, Newton Heath play against Burton Albion. It's very enjoyable, and Ronaldo's only brilliant, and you have to watch him because you compare him with everyone else. Everything's relative. So without international sport, the footprint of these things would fall dramatically, and then you just make it a very local thing. It cuts down egos, and egos is one of the biggest causes of climate change. So I think there's lots to be said for shrinking it and making it local.
James, that's a wonderfully refreshing take for a programme of radical localisation of sport. And I know it's long been a debate whenever we talk about Olympic legacy funding, that there's a lot which has always been assumed about how the funding of elite sport will automatically lead through to a revival at the grassroots, which doesn't always happen. So maybe this sort of shift from elite to more engaged local level sport is something that we can see coming along. But now let's go to the wonderful triple act of Jennifer, Katie and Mark, and let's start with Jennifer and hear from our Pledgeball friends.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I was just thinking that in terms of sports in the future, I do think that organizations, powerful clubs, still have a lot room for improvement when it comes to influence. For example, the creation of supportive structures for both athletes and also fans, but also other stakeholders, to make it, for example, more the default that fans, for example, can easily travel to events, to the mega events using public transport and stuff like this. So I think with the power that some clubs at least have and some sport organizations do have, we can have an influence on those kind of things. There can be change. But on a more general note, I just wanted to quickly say that it's also on us and all sports organizations that started to do things that we should actually try to make sure that we integrate already existing research on, for example, mobilizing climate action and engaging the public to take action, all the lessons learned to really make sure that we don't make the same mistakes over and over again, because for this, we don't have that much time anymore. So yeah, that's.
Thank you, Jenny. That's great. Katie.
I think mine's thinking more in the immediate as to what I'd like to see clubs doing now, rather than visualizing how I'd like them to look in the future. I don't know if that's just how my mind works, or how I feel it's manageable to deal with addressing climate change. I think in the immediate, I'd like all sports to own their impact. And I guess this harks back to the point I made about the narrative, that people immediately say, this is my impact, this is what I'm doing to change it, and this is what I'm going to do. And also that every sport leaves a legacy that is a positive legacy. So, Jenny mentioned about the transport, but it's all very well having this desire to make sustainable lifestyle changes, but obviously one of the key things is the structural support provided, whether it's buses, as Jenny said, for fans travelling to games, and that's already within capacity for certain events to assist with, is leaving a legacy of, say, green public transport. So, like I said, mine's more the immediate, but I think there is plenty that could be done now.
That's great, Katie. Thank you so much. Let's go straight to Mark.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's been lots of great ideas here, and mine's probably more radical, a bit like James's, so I won't repeat them. But I think, thinking more broadly, I think one goal that I would like to come from this is actually something that's not actually related to sport, but is about democratization. It's about giving people a voice and giving collectives a voice and giving fans and athletes an actual voice in what is happening in their workplace or in their leisure activities. And particularly coming from a fan perspective, fans are often seen as people to be regulated. They're consumers to buy products, merchandise, or they are potential hooligans and troublemakers. Whereas, and often they don't have a voice within their clubs. And there has been a move, Andrew, you mentioned about AFC Wimbledon, about supporters' trust, giving the fans themselves a voice. But on something like climate change, which isn't intrinsically or obviously linked for clubs to football clubs or to footballing authorities, actually it gives fans an opportunity to start having a conversation with them and building those relationships with clubs to say, well, look, some of us are actually quite decent human beings. We care about our communities and our localities, and maybe we've got some solutions here. And can you listen to us, please? And potentially that then ripples out, I would hope, into broader society and also politics, where that democratization takes place, where we have a voice and we listen to. And I think that's not restricted to sport or climate change, but it's quite a big dream, I guess.
It's a big dream, and we already see, I suppose, in the changing tone of the debate about the fan voice, that some of that tripping over into reality. And I see Barney chipping in there saying a lot of work to be done on turning over the stereotype of the fan. And my gosh, fandom has changed enormously from what I remember in the early 1980s. So great change does happen and is happening. And with that, and again with a slightly different complementary dimension, and we'll hear probably a little thought from Melissa maybe about what the athletes themselves are going to do. But Chris from Planet Earth Games, let's hear your thought.
Yeah, I'd echo some of the talk about. I think international bodies should be. Let's take FIFA for example. They talk about financial fair play. We should also be talking about environmental fair play and social fair play, and what the actual club should be measured on that as well. And there should be some sort of rules about a club doesn't just come into a community and just take from that community to give something back as well. Leads the way environmentally and socially as well. And the other left field suggestion I would have is that sport is a great influencer. It has such power to influence society. I'd like to see, so I think it'd be quite powerful if, for example, in athletics as a sport I follow closely, I know it would make an immediate massive difference, but if they actually had bamboo batons or things like that, it's just very visual. It just speaks to a lot of people straight away, that sort of thing. You don't need to have a plastic baton or a metal baton, just to think about things a bit differently. I think those visual changes people would see would influence people and have a ripple effect.
That's lovely, Chris. I grew up next to a cricket bat factory. So the old days of natural products in sports kit feels like a nice place to go back to. But going full circle, all the way back round the loop, let's hear now from Melissa.
Yeah, I think following on from what Chris was just saying, to me, sport seems like this pretty magical place in which, because of the commercial interest, you often have huge budgets involved and a lot of money floating around. You also have this global world stage, and looking at a scenario like an Olympic Village, given that you've got individuals who need solutions for travel and clothing and diet and energy use, if we can use sport as the place where innovation happens, or a key place where innovation happens on this global stage that gets loads of promotion and has a huge platform, I think that's a really exciting opportunity where we can work out some of the real challenges, because we've got lots of the answers in place, but there's still a lot of innovation that I think needs to happen. And if sport can be one of the environments in which those sorts of things are worked out, and I guess, Andrew, you said, what can athletes be doing? I think the more that those solutions can be publicised by athletes, because often they're the individuals who are in front of the camera lens or have the microphone put in, and given the opportunity to speak and share ideas. And I think the more that athletes can recognise the power that they have in this space, the more swiftly we can make progress. And it's a huge opportunity, and I think it's really exciting that athletes are starting to see that. So if in 2-3 years' time, people very readily associate athletes with champions, with being champions for Earth or advocates for this, and really using their voice and the platform that their hard work has given them.
And huge credit to you, Melissa, for creating a platform from which athletes can do that. And I've been seeing them do that on the OlyEarth Instagram feed remarkably successfully. So the message is getting out there. And I think it's a useful reminder about how quickly attitudes and understandings and awareness of an issue can change. And many of the people that we've been hearing from just amongst our panelists, we've only really come together over the last few months, and the speed with which the conversation has developed. And you've heard the range of ideas, the refreshing range and diversity of ways in which we're engaging on this, from visions of how sport could look different to the way that it's being introduced at the top table, I find incredibly encouraging. And I think it's one of the most refreshing new voices in the environmental sphere and space that I've come across. I love Chris's idea of an environmental fair play mark, for example. I mean, what a great notion that that should be a standard thing for all sports clubs. Now, the last thing I wanted to say today, if anybody is listening in who is part of an organization that will be interested to remain part of this conversation, please do pop onto the Rapid Transition website and sign up as an organization. If you're working in the sports sphere, please do join us in the Cool Down Network, Sport for Climate Action. We meet regularly, about sort of every 4 or 5 weeks online, share information, plot things jointly, and we are organising events in the run-up to the Climate COP in Glasgow. And do come along and play in the World COP. You could stand a chance to win a share of a trophy made by a leading British artist, etc., and have fun in the process. With that, please stay in touch. If you've got any further questions, we're really easy to find via the website. And I've been asked by my colleague Nikki if we can take a screenshot with everybody smiling. Nikki, please, if nobody else pulls a face in utter horror, please, Nikki, please go ahead and take a screenshot. You're probably far better at doing it than I am, because I don't actually know how to. So everybody smile. And hopefully Nikki will have got a screenshot from that. So I'm just going to end with saying thanks everyone for tuning in. We must have said something interesting, because everybody stayed online for the entire length of our conversation. In my head, this was going to last an hour and 15 minutes. We've only gone a couple of minutes over that. Brilliant. Look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Please follow up with questions and let us know what you're doing. Really nice to see you all, and see you all again soon.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Andrew.